Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Augusta, Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The winter of 1849 brought unusually cold temperatures to Augusta, Georgia. Frost patterns formed on window panes along Broad Street, and the Savannah River carried ice fragments downstream, something locals claimed they'd never witnessed before. It was during this bitter cold January that the Lafleur plantation, approximately 17 miles west of Augusta proper, became the setting for what would later be described in hushed tones as the incident at Whispering Oaks. The Lafleur estate occupied nearly 800 acres of prime cotton-growing land, bordered on the east by the Augusta Canal and on the west by dense woodland that stretched toward the South Carolina border. The property was known for two things: its exceptional cotton yield and the curious absence of any official record regarding the number of enslaved persons who lived and worked there. While neighboring plantations meticulously recorded their human property in ledgers and tax documents, the Lafleur registers showed curious omissions and inconsistencies that would later become central to understanding what happened. According to county records from 1837, the plantation was acquired by Maurice Lafleur, a third-generation French immigrant who had built his fortune in the textile trade in Charleston before expanding westward into Georgia. The move proved financially astute, as Augusta had developed into a major inland port city, with the canal providing direct access to markets. Maurice Lafleur lived there with his wife Eleanor and their daughter Sarah Ann, who was 19 years old in 1849, according to the parish baptismal records at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. The Lafleur family was not particularly social by Augusta standards. They rarely attended the seasonal balls or Sunday services, which generated steady whispers among the local society. Eleanor Lafleur was rumored to suffer from nervous exhaustion, a condition that kept her confined to the upper floors of their three-story mansion. The daughter, Sarah Ann, was described in a private letter from Magistrate Joseph Williams to his cousin in Savannah as uncommonly beautiful, but possessed of a stillness that unnerves those who engage her in conversation. The letter, discovered during courthouse renovations in 1963, continues: "She watches with eyes that seem to measure one's worth, not as a gentleman caller, but as something else entirely. I cannot describe the sensation, except to say I was relieved when our introduction concluded." Benjamin Crowe entered the historical record on December 18, 1848, when his name appeared in a bill of sale indicating he had been purchased from the estate of a deceased tobacco planter in Richmond, Virginia. The document, now housed in the Georgia Historical Society archives, describes him as 26 years of age, literate, skilled in accounting and management of agricultural ventures. The unusually high price paid, $1,800, suggests he was considered exceptionally valuable for his skills. What brought Crowe specifically to the Lafleur plantation remains unclear. Most skilled enslaved persons in Augusta worked either in the textile mills or as craftsmen in the growing urban center. A plantation overseer with Crowe's documented abilities would have been more valuable in larger operations farther south. Yet Maurice Lafleur traveled personally to Richmond to secure his purchase, according to travel receipts found among his papers. The events that unfolded between December 1848 and March 1849 were pieced together decades later from fragments of documents, portions of a household ledger kept by Sarah Ann Lafleur, weather-damaged correspondence between Maurice Lafleur and his cotton broker in Charleston, and most significantly, a journal attributed to Benjamin Crowe himself, discovered in 1958 during the demolition of slave quarters on what had once been the eastern edge of the Lafleur property. The journal, written in a tight, precise hand on pages torn from plantation account books, begins on January 2nd, 1849, with the words, "Master Lafleur has granted the unusual privilege of maintaining these accounts of daily management, claiming that my literacy shall serve the efficiency of this operation. I suspect other motives." The locked room in the West Wing remains a source of nightly sounds no one acknowledges by daylight. In the following entries, Crowe methodically documented cotton production, supply orders, and personnel assignments. Between these mundane details emerged troubling observations. He noted that the plantation operated with significantly fewer field workers than properties of comparable size, 37 compared to the typical 60 or 70. More concerning was his observation that replacements arrive monthly, though I see no evidence of sales or transfers of those who disappear. On January 19th, Crowe recorded, "Tonight, I observed Miss Sarah Ann walking alone toward the old sugar house near the North Woods. The temperature was well below freezing. She carried no lantern, yet moved with the confidence of someone who knows precisely where each obstacle lies in her path. Upon her return, 3 hours later, her shoes bore no mud, despite the thawed ground near the house perimeter." By early February, the entries became increasingly focused on Sarah Ann Lafleur. Crowe described her daily routine with particular attention to unusual behaviors. Her habit of collecting soil samples from various points on the property, her lengthy, solitary walks regardless of weather conditions, and most notably, her apparent insomnia. "Miss Lafleur's candle remains lit until dawn," he wrote on February 12th. "From my quarters, I can observe her shadow moving about her room at hours when all others sleep. She appears to be transcribing or drawing with great concentration." The relationship between Crowe and Sarah Ann is difficult to determine from existing records, but several entries suggest a complex dynamic developed. On February 23rd, Crowe wrote, "Miss Lafleur requested my assistance in her personal study today. The room contains an extensive collection of botanical texts and geological surveys, unusual interests for a plantation daughter. She questioned me extensively about my knowledge of the Virginia soil composition and mineral content. When I inquired as to her interest, she merely stated that the earth remembers what people choose to forget. She then dismissed me without explanation." March brought unseasonably warm weather to Augusta, and with it came a noticeable shift in the journal's tone. On March 3rd, Crowe recorded, "I have been instructed to prepare the sugar house for special processing, a term Master Lafleur uses with particular emphasis. The building has not been used for its intended purpose in more than a decade, according to the older workers, who avoid even walking near it. I was required to install new locks on both the exterior and interior doors. The tools I was told to place inside are not those of sugar production." The most disturbing entry came on March 7th. "What I witnessed tonight cannot be explained by any natural or Christian understanding of our world. I write this, knowing that discovery of these words would mean certain death. Miss Sarah Ann summoned me to assist with what she called night work." In the sugar house were 3 newly arrived workers from the Collins plantation. They were secured to the center support beam. Miss Sarah Ann dismissed her father, stating that the process requires precision he lacks. What followed was something I cannot fully describe, except to say that no sound emerged from that building, despite what occurred within. When it concluded 3 hours later, Miss Sarah Ann appeared unchanged, except for a certain clarity in her eyes that was not present before. The workers were no longer present, yet I observed no one removing them. The journal entries become increasingly fragmented after this date. Crowe's handwriting deteriorates, and coherent thoughts give way to scattered observations. The soil near the North Woods has changed color. Miss S. watches me constantly now. Voices beneath the floorboards of my quarters. The final entry, dated March 21st, consists of a single line. They know that I know. No further writings from Benjamin Crowe have ever been discovered. His name disappears from the plantation records after this date. An inventory document from April 1849 makes no mention of him, though it does reference adjustment of assets following unavoidable losses in the previous month. What happened at the Lafleur plantation became a matter of public record approximately 6 weeks later, when an unusually heavy spring rain caused a section of the North Woods to collapse, revealing what county authorities initially believed to be an old well or storage cellar. The Augusta Chronicle from May 12, 1849, contains a brief mention. Unusual discovery at Lafleur estate requires magistrate investigation. Details withheld pending further examination. No follow-up article ever appeared in the Chronicle. However, court records indicate that Maurice Lafleur sold the plantation in June 1849 and relocated with his family to New Orleans. The sale price was remarkably below market value, suggesting urgency in the transaction. The new owners, the Blackwood family, maintained the property for less than 2 years before abandoning it entirely, claiming in a petition to the county tax assessor that the land has turned sour and will bear no profitable crop despite all conventional efforts. The property remained unoccupied until 1862, when it was briefly used as a Confederate field hospital following the battles near Atlanta. A military surgeon's log, discovered in the National Archives in 1952, contains a curious entry. The men refused to be housed in the northern section of the property. They claimed to hear voices beneath the ground at night. Rational medicine has no explanation for such shared delusion, yet I myself will not walk those grounds after sunset. The most significant development in understanding the Lafleur mystery came nearly a century later. In August 1958, during urban expansion projects in what had once been the northern section of the original plantation, construction workers uncovered a series of underground chambers approximately 20 feet below the surface. The chambers appeared to have been carefully excavated and reinforced with brick and timber supports. City engineers estimated they had been created in the mid-19th century. According to the official report filed with the Augusta Historical Commission, the chambers contained evidence of habitation and what appears to be scientific or experimental apparatus of unknown purpose. The report specifically mentions glass containers, metal implements resembling surgical tools, and unusual mineral formations along the walls that do not match known geological patterns in the region. Most disturbing was the discovery of what the report clinically describes as human remains, showing evidence of precise surgical modification. The remains were estimated to belong to between 15 and 20 individuals. The report notes that certain skeletal elements appear to have been subjected to controlled chemical processes, resulting in partial dissolution and reformation of bone structure. The chambers and their contents were documented by university researchers for approximately 3 weeks before being permanently sealed by order of the county commissioner, ostensibly for public safety concerns due to structural instability. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, the lead anthropologist on site, filed a formal protest regarding the premature termination of the research. Her letter, dated September 23, 1958, states, "What we have discovered represents a previously undocumented type of activity that challenges our understanding of antebellum scientific knowledge. The precision of the modifications and the systematic arrangement of the chambers suggest purpose rather than madness." Dr. Montgomery's research notes disappeared from university archives in 1962. Her academic career ended abruptly the following year, when she was committed to Central State Hospital in Milledgeville, following what colleagues described as a profound personality change and persistent delusional state. Hospital records indicate she repeatedly drew the same pattern on any available surface, a pattern that reportedly matched the unusual mineral formations found on the chamber walls. The final piece of the Lafleur mystery emerged in 1967, when renovation work at the Blackwood family crypt in Magnolia Cemetery uncovered a hidden compartment containing a sealed metal box. Inside was a handwritten manuscript believed to be written by Thomas Blackwood, the son of the family that briefly owned the Lafleur plantation. The manuscript, dated 1878, nearly 30 years after the events, begins with the line, "I write this account knowing it will find no place in official histories, yet the truth of what occurred at Whispering Oaks must not be entirely lost." According to Blackwood's account, Sarah Ann Lafleur had spent several years studying forbidden scientific texts acquired through her father's European business connections. She had developed theories regarding human adaptation and organic transformation that went far beyond the primitive understanding of biology in that era. The manuscript claims she believed that humans could be systematically modified through precise application of mineral compounds and controlled environmental conditions. The underground chambers, according to Blackwood, were her laboratory. Benjamin Crowe had been purchased specifically for his intelligence and observational skills, not as a test subject, but as a trained assistant. The manuscript suggests that Sarah Ann recognized in Crowe a scientific mind comparable to her own, despite the social and racial boundaries of their time. The most chilling aspect of Blackwood's account concerns the ultimate fate of the experiments. He claims that Sarah Ann's work achieved a form of success, though not what she had initially intended. The manuscript states, "Those who were transformed no longer required air or sustenance as we understand these needs. They existed in a state between life and death, responsive to her commands, yet incapable of independent thought. Most disturbing was their ability to merge partially with the earth itself, moving through soil and stone as a fish moves through water." The manuscript goes on to claim that Benjamin Crowe, upon fully understanding the nature of the experiments, attempted to alert authorities in Augusta. Before he could do so, he became Sarah Ann's final subject, one who retained his awareness throughout the transformation process. Blackwood writes, "The family's hasty departure came not from fear of legal consequences, but because they could no longer control what they had created. The modified beings, with Crowe now among them, had developed abilities beyond Sarah Ann's predictions. They began to emerge at night, their forms only partially visible, their purposes unknowable." Blackwood concludes his manuscript with a warning. "We sealed the known entrances to the chambers before abandoning the property, but I fear such barriers mean little to these entities. They exist now in the spaces between what we understand as firm reality. I have sometimes, in the decades since, wondered if they remain confined to that cursed property, or if they have found their way into the wider world, moving beneath our feet, observing our civilization from the darkness below." The Blackwood manuscript was examined by several experts who verified its age and authenticity based on paper composition and ink analysis. However, its contents were dismissed as the product of 19th-century superstition and possible mental instability. The document was placed in the Augusta Historical Society archives, where it remained largely forgotten until 1968. That year, a graduate student named Michael Conroy came across references to both the underground chambers and the Blackwood manuscript while researching his dissertation on unusual geological formations in eastern Georgia. Conroy's academic advisors discouraged his interest in what they considered a distraction from serious research. Undeterred, he began conducting independent field studies at the former Lafleur property, which by then had been partially developed into suburban housing, with approximately 40 acres of the original Northwoods remaining undisturbed as a municipal greenbelt. According to police reports, Conroy was reported missing on October 12, 1968. His vehicle was found at the entrance to the Greenbelt walking trail. A search party organized by local authorities found his research equipment and notebooks scattered approximately half a mile into the wooded area. The notebooks contained detailed soil analysis data and what appeared to be attempts to map underground structures using primitive ground-penetrating equipment he had constructed. The final page of his field notebook, recovered partially damaged by exposure to moisture, contains a hasty entry. Something moving beneath the surface, not animal, patterns match Blackwood's description, attempting to establish communication. Below this is a rough sketch of what appears to be a human hand emerging from soil, though the proportions and joint structures are notably distorted. Conroy's disappearance was officially attributed to accidental death, possibly falling into one of the many unmarked wells or sinkholes common to the area. His body was never recovered despite an extensive search. The case was officially closed in 1969. In a perhaps related incident, 3 members of the search team reported experiencing unusual symptoms in the weeks following the operation: persistent dreams of underground spaces, temporary loss of vision when in direct sunlight, and an inability to remain in one place for extended periods. All 3 eventually relocated from Augusta, citing health concerns. No formal medical study connected these symptoms to their involvement in the Conroy search. The former Lafleur plantation property has since been completely developed. The Greenbelt was reduced to a 10-acre park in the 1980s. Modern residents show no awareness of the land's history beyond vague references to its antebellum past. Occasionally, homeowners in the area report unusual problems with their foundations or persistent issues with their gardens failing to thrive despite optimal conditions. In 1992, a minor earthquake measuring 3.2 on the Richter scale caused several small sinkholes to open in the park area. City workers dispatched to fill the holes reported hearing what they described as whispering sounds coming from beneath the ground. Their supervisor attributed this to air moving through underground hollow spaces, a common natural phenomenon. The holes were filled with concrete and reinforced to prevent future collapse. The Augusta Historical Society maintains a small collection of items related to the Lafleur case, including photographs of the underground chambers before they were sealed, soil samples taken from the site in 1958, and a copy of the Blackwood manuscript. These materials are not part of the regular public exhibition and can only be viewed with special permission for academic research purposes. The last official investigation related to the Lafleur property occurred in 1969, when the Augusta Water Authority detected unusual mineral content in groundwater samples taken near the former North Woods. The investigation was abandoned when subsequent samples showed normal composition. The temporary anomaly was attributed to equipment calibration errors. Of Benjamin Crowe, no further historical traces exist beyond his journal and the references to him in the Blackwood manuscript. No grave bears his name, and no official death record was ever filed. Sarah Ann Lafleur lived until 1893, dying at the age of 63 in New Orleans. Her death certificate lists the cause as natural decline. According to obituary notices in the New Orleans Picayune, she never married and lived as a recluse, devoted to private scientific studies that she shared with no one. Local Augusta legend occasionally references the whisperers beneath, particularly among older families with generations of residents in the area. These stories typically involve unexplained sounds heard through floorboards or strange movements detected in soft ground at twilight. Most folklorists attribute these tales to the natural human tendency to create narratives around historical tragedies, in this case the known but unspecified horrors of slavery and human exploitation. However, Those who have studied the primary documents related to the Lafleur case sometimes come away with a different perspective. Dr. James Holbrook, who examined the soil samples as part of a geological survey in 1984, wrote in his private notes, later donated to the university archives, "The mineral composition defies standard classification. Under certain lighting conditions, the crystalline structures appear to reconfigure themselves into patterns resembling organic cellular structures. I find myself reluctant to continue this line of investigation." Today, the suburban development that stands on the former Lafleur plantation appears entirely ordinary. Children play in yards where unimaginable events may have occurred. Families gather for barbecues over ground that may hide mysteries never fully resolved. The Savannah River continues its eternal flow nearby, perhaps carrying secrets downstream that will never surface in the light of day. Yet occasionally, usually during unusually cold winters, like the one in 1849, residents report a curious phenomenon, the sound of scratching beneath their homes, as if something is slowly, methodically testing the barriers between two worlds. City inspectors invariably attribute these sounds to settling foundations, water pipes, or small animals seeking warmth. What truly happened at the Lafleur plantation in the winter of 1849 remains a mystery, composed of fragmented evidence and disturbing possibilities. The Journal of Benjamin Crowe offers the most direct window into those events, yet even that account raises more questions than it answers. Was Sarah Ann Lafleur a disturbed individual whose cruel experiments represented a particularly terrible expression of the inhumanity of slavery? Or did she discover something beyond conventional understanding of her time, or indeed of our own? The underground chambers remain sealed, the remaining documents sit in climate-controlled archives, and the land itself keeps whatever secrets it may hold. Perhaps that is for the best. As Thomas Blackwood wrote in the final lines of his manuscript, there are truths that serve no purpose in being widely known. Some discoveries should remain buried, not out of ignorance, but wisdom. What moves in the spaces beneath our world belongs to a different order of existence, one that we should neither disturb nor invite closer observation from. In the years since the last official investigation, Augusta has grown and changed. The history of the Lafleur plantation has faded from local memory, becoming at most a footnote in academic studies of the region's past. Yet the land remembers, as Sarah Ann Lafleur allegedly once observed. And perhaps, in the silence of night, in the spaces beneath modern foundations, something else remembers too. A final, curious note. In 2003, during installation of fiber optic cables in the neighborhood built over the former plantation, workers reported finding an unusual object approximately 4 feet below the surface. According to their description, it appeared to be a metal container similar to a pocket watch. Inside was what looked like densely packed soil. Before it could be properly documented or examined, the object reportedly disintegrated upon exposure to air, leaving only a fine dust that was dispersed by the wind. No official record of this discovery exists beyond the workers' verbal account. Perhaps the last word on the Lafleur mystery belongs to Benjamin Crowe himself, who wrote in one of his final coherent journal entries, "I now understand why Miss Sarah Ann studies the soil so intently. It's not merely earth beneath our feet, but a medium, a space where transformation is possible. She speaks of the future as if she can already see it unfolding beneath us, growing like roots through what we consider solid ground." Tonight, she said something that continues to echo in my thoughts. Some will walk above and some will move below, but eventually, these separate paths must converge. I fear I now understand what role she intends for me in this convergence. Local historians have occasionally attempted to piece together a more complete understanding of the Lafleur case, but they consistently encounter unusual obstacles. Records disappear from archives without explanation. Digital copies become corrupted. Even audio recordings of interviews with descendants of Augusta families who might have knowledge of the events tend to develop inexplicable distortions precisely when certain details are discussed. In 2008, Dr. Elaine Winters of Augusta University began compiling an academic paper on what she termed scientific anomalies in antebellum Georgia, with the Lafleur case as her central focus. After 3 months of research, she abandoned the project entirely, citing methodological concerns and insufficient primary documentation. Colleagues noted her increasing reluctance to discuss the topic and her eventual transfer to a different department specializing in conventional Southern agricultural history. What remains particularly striking about the Lafleur case is the consistent pattern of investigation followed by abandonment. Those who begin to examine the evidence rarely complete their work, and those who do often distance themselves from their own conclusions. The papers of Dr. Montgomery, the anthropologist who first documented the underground chambers in 1958, were sealed by her family following her institutionalization. They remain unavailable to researchers, despite numerous academic requests for access. This pattern extends to physical investigations as well. In 1996, a geological survey team used ground-penetrating radar to map subsurface structures in the area as part of a routine municipal water system upgrade. According to internal memoranda later obtained through public records requests, the team identified anomalous hollow spaces approximately 40 feet beneath the current park area, significantly deeper than the chambers discovered in 1958. The project manager requested additional funding to investigate further, but the request was denied without explanation. The survey team was reassigned to a different project on the opposite side of Augusta. Perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence regarding Benjamin Crowe's fate emerged in 2011, when amateur historian Robert Thornton discovered a series of letters in the attic of his recently purchased historic home in Augusta's Somerville neighborhood. The home had previously belonged to the Westbrook family, descendants of Judge William Westbrook, who served on Augusta's Circuit Court from 1846 to 1853. Among the family papers was a sealed envelope marked "Personal and confidential, to be destroyed upon my death." The seal had never been broken. Inside was a letter dated April 26, 1849, written by Judge Westbrook to his brother in Philadelphia. The letter describes a private meeting with Maurice Lafleur regarding the unfortunate business at his property. According to Westbrook, Lafleur sought legal advice about obligations toward a man who is no longer legally classifiable as property, living or deceased. The letter continues. Lafleur claims the individual in question, a former slave purchased from Virginia, has undergone some manner of transformation, rendering his status ambiguous. I pressed for details, but found his explanations scientifically implausible. He did, however, produce documentation suggesting this man, despite his altered condition, retains full cognitive function and has made written demands regarding his liberty. Most significantly, Westbrook writes, I advised Lafleur that any being capable of articulating a demand for freedom must be recognized as human under law, regardless of physical condition or appearance. Lafleur seemed displeased with this opinion, intimating that his daughter's scientific work had produced results that existing law cannot adequately address. He departed, stating his intention to resolve the situation through other means. I confess this exchange has left me deeply unsettled. The letter concludes with an unusual request. Should you hear reports of unusual phenomena in the vicinity of Augusta in coming years, particularly regarding disturbances beneath the earth, I ask that you document them with care. I fear we have entered territory where the bounds between natural philosophy and something darker have been transgressed. Thornton made the letter available to the Augusta Historical Society, where it was authenticated based on paper composition, ink analysis, and comparison with Westbrook's known handwriting. The implications that Benjamin Crowe survived whatever transformation occurred, but in a state that challenged 19th century legal and scientific understanding, add a disturbing dimension to the already troubling narrative. Further connections to the Lafleur case emerged in 2014 when researchers digitizing records from Central State Hospital in Milledgeville discovered case notes regarding Dr. Eliza Montgomery, the anthropologist who studied the underground chambers in 1958 before her psychiatric commitment. Her attending physician noted that Montgomery repeatedly made the same statement during her initial evaluation. "They're not confined to the chambers. They move through the ground like fish through water, watching, waiting for something. Benjamin still has his mind, but the others are just extensions now, her extensions." The most recent development in the Lafleur mystery occurred in 2019, when construction began on a new community center in the park area. Excavation for the foundation uncovered what appeared to be a sealed brick tunnel, approximately 12 feet below the surface. Work was temporarily halted while city engineers assessed the structure. According to the official report, the tunnel extended in the direction of the former Lafleur mansion site, but had collapsed approximately 30 feet from the excavation point, making further exploration impossible without significant structural reinforcement. Before a decision could be made regarding further investigation, an unseasonable torrential rainstorm caused flooding that completely filled the excavation site with mud and debris. When the area was cleared 3 days later, workers reported that the tunnel opening had disappeared entirely, the brick structure seemingly having dissolved into the surrounding soil. City officials attributed this to natural erosion and soil movement caused by the flooding, though several engineers privately expressed skepticism regarding this explanation. Most disturbing was the discovery made by one of the construction workers who had initially documented the tunnel. Upon reviewing his digital photographs taken before the flooding, he found that every image showed only solid earth, where he distinctly remembered seeing and photographing the brick structure. When he brought this discrepancy to his supervisor's attention, he was reassigned to a different project. He later resigned from the construction company, citing personal reasons. The worker, who requested anonymity when interviewed by a local history blogger in 2020, stated, "I know what I saw. It was a tunnel, brick-lined, old but in perfect condition. The opening was perfectly round, about 4 feet in diameter, and inside it looked almost polished, like something had moved through it repeatedly over a long period of time, wearing down any roughness. I took at least a dozen photos. They're just gone now, replaced with pictures of dirt. But I know what I saw." What are we to make of the Lafleur case from our modern perspective? The fragmentary evidence suggests several possibilities, none entirely satisfactory. The conventional historical interpretation frames it as an example of the horrific medical experimentation that occasionally occurred during slavery, a dark chapter of science conducted outside ethical and legal boundaries. In this view, Sarah Ann Lafleur was simply a disturbed individual whose wealth and social position allowed her to indulge in terrible cruelty under the guise of scientific inquiry. A more controversial interpretation, advanced by a small group of researchers who have studied the case in depth, suggests that Sarah Ann may have actually made discoveries regarding human biological adaptation that went far beyond the scientific understanding of her time, or indeed our own. These researchers point to the unusual mineral compositions found in soil samples, the consistent reports of underground movements over more than a century, and the persistent pattern of investigation followed by inexplicable abandonment. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Lafleur mystery is how effectively it has resisted formal historical documentation. Unlike many other historical events that grow clearer with the passage of time and the discovery of additional evidence, the events at Whispering Oaks seem to become more obscured, as if actively resisting examination. Records disappear. Investigators abandon their work. Digital files corrupt. Photographs show something different from what witnesses remember capturing. The fate of Benjamin Crowe remains the central human question in this historical puzzle. Was he, as the evidence suggests, an intelligent man forced into an unimaginable transformation by Sarah Ann's experiments? Did he, as Judge Westbrook's letter implies, survive this process with his consciousness intact, only to be denied even the basic legal recognition of his humanity? And if so, what became of him in the decades, now centuries, that followed? The land that once comprised the Lafleur plantation has been built over, paved over, developed and redeveloped as Augusta grew from a 19th century industrial center into a modern southern city. Yet beneath the contemporary structures, the earth remains, the same earth that Sarah Ann Lafleur studied so intently, believing it held transformative properties beyond conventional understanding. Occasionally, residents in the area report a curious phenomenon during thunderstorms. When lightning illuminates the ground momentarily, some claim to have seen what appears to be the impression of a human hand pressed up against the undersides of puddles, as if something below is testing the barrier between two worlds. These reports are invariably dismissed as optical illusions or overactive imaginations. In 2022, a middle school science project on soil composition in different parts of Augusta yielded an unexpected result. Samples taken from the park area showed trace elements not typically found in Georgia soil, elements more commonly associated with mineral deposits in Virginia, where Benjamin Crowe originated. When the student's father attempted to have the samples professionally analyzed, they were reported to have been compromised during transport and unsuitable for testing. The Augusta Historical Society maintains a small, rarely visited exhibit on 19th century plantation life that includes a single reference to the Lafleur case, a reproduction of a page from Benjamin Crowe's journal, showing his methodical handwriting and precise observational skills. The explanatory text identifies him simply as an educated, enslaved man who kept records for his owners. No mention is made of the underground chambers, the Blackwood manuscript, or the subsequent investigations. It is as if the full story has been deliberately minimized, reduced to a footnote in local history. For those few who have studied the case in its entirety, this institutional silence appears less like historical oversight and more like collective avoidance, as if some unspoken agreement exists to look away from certain possibilities. As one retired archivist from the Georgia Historical Society remarked in a private correspondence, some historical events cast shadows that extend far beyond their immediate time and place. The Lafleur case is one of those. I've come to believe that the fragmentation of the record is not accidental, but necessary, a protective mechanism against something we're not prepared to fully comprehend. Perhaps the final word on the mystery belongs to Benjamin Crowe himself, in what may have been his last written communication. In 1973, during renovation work on one of Augusta's oldest downtown buildings, a structure that once housed the offices of a cotton broker known to have done business with Maurice Lafleur, workers discovered a sealed cavity in an interior wall. Inside was a small metal container holding a single sheet of paper, the handwriting matching that of Crowe's known journal entries. The message, dated simply April 1849, reads, "To whoever finds this, I write from a place between. What she has done cannot be undone. I retain my thoughts, but my form is changed beyond recovery. I move now through earth and stone as others move through air. I'm not alone in this condition. There are others, though their minds have not survived the transition as mine has. They follow her still, even as I resist. She believes she has created a new form of existence, but she has merely opened a door to something that was always here, waiting beneath. I have learned to extend my perception through the ground itself, to sense vibrations miles distant, to hear conversations through the foundations of buildings. I know now that her work will continue long after she is gone. Those she has transformed will remain, adapting, changing the very composition of the soil over decades. And eventually the separate worlds above and below must meet. I leave this warning. What moves beneath Augusta is patient. It has already waited centuries. It can wait centuries more. The document was transferred to the university for analysis, but according to official records, it was destroyed in a small laboratory fire before testing could be completed. No photographs or copies were made. The researcher who initially received the document left academia shortly afterward and reportedly relocated to another state. Attempts to contact them for this account were unsuccessful. Today, Augusta continues to grow and change. New buildings rise over ground that may hold untold secrets. The park that once formed part of the Lafleur plantation remains a popular recreation area, particularly beautiful in spring when dogwoods bloom and families gather for picnics, unknowing of what may lie beneath their feet. Perhaps it is just as well. Some historical mysteries are better left unexplored. Some doors, once opened, cannot be easily closed again. The case of Benjamin Crowe and Sarah Ann Lafleur reminds us that history is not merely a record of the past, but sometimes an active force that continues to shape our world in ways we may never fully understand. On particularly quiet nights, residents near the old Lafleur property sometimes report a curious sound, not quite voices, not quite movement, but something between the two, rising from the ground beneath their homes. Most dismiss it as settling foundations or underground water movement. Few make the connection to events that transpired more than 170 years ago, when a man named Benjamin Crowe made his final journal entry before disappearing from historical record, but perhaps not from existence. Augusta sleeps, and beneath it, something waits, watches, and remembers. The separate paths, as Sarah Ann once predicted, may yet converge. The only question is when. In 2023, a geology graduate student conducting research on unusual mineral deposits in eastern Georgia reported finding a soil sample containing organic material with a DNA structure he described as fundamentally impossible, according to current biological understanding. His academic advisors urged him to re-examine his methodology, suggesting equipment contamination. Before he could complete this verification, the student withdrew from the university, citing personal reasons. His research notes, according to department records, were never formally filed with the university archives. The land that once comprised the Lafleur plantation continues its slow, imperceptible transformation. What truly moves beneath the surface remains known only to those who, like Benjamin Crowe, exist in the spaces between conventional understanding, watching, waiting, remembering. For those who know where to look, the signs are there, subtle but persistent. Unusual mineral compositions in soil samples, electronic equipment that malfunctions in specific locations, the consistent pattern of investigations abandoned before completion, and perhaps most telling, the strange reluctance that overcomes even the most dedicated researchers when they approach certain aspects of the case, as if some instinctive warning system activates, urging them to look away from possibilities too disturbing to contemplate. Benjamin Crowe entered the historical record as property, a man whose skills commanded a high price but whose humanity was legally denied. He disappeared from that record under circumstances that challenge our understanding of what is possible. And perhaps in some form we cannot fully comprehend, he remains, a consciousness trapped between worlds, moving through earth and stone, carrying the memory of what happened at Whispering Oaks during that cold winter in 1849. The separate paths above and below continue, but as Sarah Ann Lafleur predicted and Benjamin Crowe feared, they may eventually converge. Until then, Augusta builds, grows and lives above a mystery that has never been fully resolved, a mystery that perhaps should remain buried, not out of ignorance, but wisdom.